My name is Shereen Cabrera-Bentley, and I am the Deputy Director for the Bureau of Behavioral Health. And I would just like to now move into some housekeeping items to make you aware of before we officially begin. First, all of the attendees today will be muted upon entry. So if you have questions or thoughts that you would like to share with us throughout the presentation today, we ask that you use your chat feature. And we've highlighted in bullets on your screen so that you can see how you are able to access the chat icon. Please make sure that you select all panelists when you are chatting so that we can ensure that we are able to see the question and pass it along. This meeting also will be recorded. Only the presenters will have the ability to display their videos. And at the end of today's presentation, we will be providing details as to how you would be able to access the recordings and any other important announcements that we will be sharing at the end. Again, I would like to welcome each and every one of you for joining us today. My name again is Shereen Cabrera-Bentley. I'm the Deputy Director for the Bureau of Behavioral Health at the Howard County Health Department. In collaboration with Empowerment Counseling, our local health improvement coalition, also known as LHIC, and various community partners who will serve as moderators for our monthly sessions, we are very excited to welcome you to the first of our three-part series on how to initiate difficult conversations about race. As we all know, talking about race, although hard or uncomfortable, is necessary. Acknowledging the history and current status of race relations in America is an opportunity to engage in thoughtful, respectful, and productive conversations. And we are here to provide tools and guidance to empower you on that journey. So again, thank you so much for joining us and for your willingness and openness to discuss and to learn about this very important topic. What I'd like to move on to now is to introduce you to our moderator for today's session. His name is Adam Bloom. Adam is the Clinical Director of Colmac Outpatient Recovery Center's Columbia location and is also a part-time private practice clinician. He is a licensed professional counselor in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, and has been practicing as a mental health provider for more than 7 years. His interests include treating patients with problematic substance use, co-occurring disorders, trauma, and working with the LGBTQ population. Adam is an advocate for lowering racial barriers and increasing behavioral health access to at-need populations. So at this time, I will turn it over to Adam Bloom. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm humbled and excited to be part of this conversation, and thank you to Howard County Health Department for asking me to be a part of this. And I'm looking forward to being in conversation with you, Dr. Evans, as we move through your insightful and much needed material, especially during this time. As I said earlier, I came to this discussion when I did a lot of work in community-based mental health and just seeing those disparities and trying to really make sure that those at-risk populations, those neediest populations, there was so much inequity. And so then trying to make sure that we were able to support them in navigating those barriers. So this is a topic that it's needed, and I'm really happy to be here. As we move forward, I do want to talk a little bit about the goals of this conversation and where we're going to go in this hour. So this is the first part of a three-part virtual series. We'll talk more about the other two towards the end of this hour. And this conversation is difficult conversations about race with adults. And Dr. Evans will offer guidance and structure around these conversations in addressing racial injustice and confusion, and increasing cultural competency, especially during this time of COVID-19, the pandemic, and the issues that have emerged during this global pandemic. So thank you all for joining us as we explore this conversation. So our objectives are clearly stated. And now I want to introduce Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans, Robert Evans III is a culturally competent psychologist, licensed clinical professional counselor, and master addictions counselor with more than 2 decades of experience and a passion for helping individuals and families recognize thoughts and behaviors that hinder progress. His career has been dedicated to enlightening people with the keys of overcoming trauma, which are to forgive oneself and or to forgive others. Dr. E is the CEO of Empowerment Counseling and Training Services, a private practice and consulting company dedicated to empowering internal gifts, connecting thoughts with behaviors, and developing character and elevating mindsets. So with that, I'm turning it over to you, Dr. Evans.
Oh man, thank you so much for that introduction. I couldn't have said that better myself. Oh man, this has been a long time coming. We have been on this journey of putting this material and this content together and looking forward to this discussion for quite some time. Since last year, the beginning of 2020 and the end of 19 going into 2020 with COVID-19 just completely devastating the Black community and then the world, right? And how all of that impacted us as a community. And, it was time to start having some discussion, but then we had multiple things that we saw on television and social media that was pushed to show us that we still have a long way to go when it comes to race relations. We've had all types of riots break out across the world due to a number of events. And it's time for us to really have a discussion. I understand the divide in America, it's a major racial divide, but it's not only interracial between races, but it's also within races. We have difficult time having these kinds of discussions just within the Black community itself, and just to put it out there for me, I know for some people they want to actually leave America. They want to go to a different country. They want to try to create a slice of pie of America with just Blacks. And for me, I'm rooted in America. My family's here. We're not going anywhere. I'm fully aware of the journey of Blacks in America and how we've come to be where we are. But in my practice, my private practice, where I'm a full-time clinician, I help people to realize where they came from and how their history has impacted their thinking and their behavior. But I don't spend all day there. We're on the what now. We're on what are we going to do now, right? So the discussion needs to be had, what now? And so that's where we are. We want to have a fruitful discussion about how to engage and how to move forward and how to do it together. Because as long as we have a mentality of division and we have this polarizing spirit where we're not in this together, we're going to have a long road ahead. And, we got to fight through the media images and all of that we see every day that's pushing an agenda to divide us. And we got to push through it. So that's what I'm hoping for today. I'm hoping everybody comes with an open mind to maybe do some readjusting of how they have previously viewed things. But I'm sure we're gonna be in for a treat. So I look forward to it.
All right, so without further ado, let's start watching some of that content. All right, Dr. Evans, thank you so much for that insightful video. There's both of them. There was just so much information that I think is applicable to the discussions that we're having today and out throughout the world and during this difficult time. So thank you so much for providing that information. Just a reminder that participants, you will be muted and the video will not, you will not be able to turn on your video. So if you have any questions about the videos that we just saw, please put them in the chat and we will get to them. But there was one question about will these be available to share, and they will be available on Howard County's website, as well as their Facebook page. So this will be available after the fact. Just looking through questions. So let's, while people are putting their questions into the chat, why don't we start with some of the questions that we've already received? So Dr. Evans, you say that it's important to state the facts, but what if there's a disagreement about what the facts are? What if two people are having a conversation, disagree on the facts, and are swayed by their emotion and or opinion about those facts?
Thank you so much, man. I really believe that might be the best question I've seen. You know, we saw a lot of questions, and I think it really does boil down to I believe what I believe and you believe what you believe, right? And prior to putting together these videos, it was a lot of material that I was sifting through that I really wanted to get out there. And it was hard to condense it into these small segments. But one of the things that we really need to be able to do is to know our audience, right? We really got to choose our battles, because going into these types of discussions with just anyone, you know, random people or people that we're not familiar with, um, I think it's really important to find out ahead what is the goal of the discussion. Oftentimes, you know, when I have these discussions, because I have them pretty frequently with friends, clients, you know, I really utilize these strategies and have different types of discussions. And I want to know what the goal is early, because if we have a difference in our goals, so like I was having the same sort of conversation with an individual, and we both have the same goal. We both want to build. We both want to find a solution. We both want to get to a resolution. And so we both had a difference of opinions about some of the events that have taken place, some of the things that have been shown more recently in media with shootings, and there's some really controversial events that have taken place that don't automatically speak to race just because it was a white police officer and a black individual who was shot. It doesn't automatically mean that the shooting was racially motivated. But because of a lot of the spin that's taken with media, that's kind of the direction that it goes often. And so we got to be able to set aside our emotions and actually look at the details of the event. Um, One of the things that I recommend as far as having that kind of conversation is to first, again, know your audience, identify what the goal of the discussion is. Is the goal to build, find a solution, or is the goal for us to divide? What do you want to be the result of this conversation? The other thing is we got to be able to really set aside our emotions, which can be really tough. I think that this is a really a self journey for all of us while we're going through this as a community, as a country. It's also a self journey because we really got to search within ourselves and really find ways to manage our emotions, find ways to manage our anxiety. Because especially for Black men, these events, because a lot of Black men that are victims, it can be very anxiety provoking. You know, for me, I definitely, I know if I see some sirens behind me, I'm gonna feel something in my stomach, right? And so to have these kinds of discussions and you already have anxiety coursing through you as a result of just your very existence, and then have all of these images on you, there's some self work that we have to be doing on a daily basis to manage all of that anyway. So, you know, the tough aspect of approaching these discussions is if you're having a conversation with someone who is not really emotionally intelligent, who doesn't do any self work, and you know, they speak before they think, and you know, this might not be the best conversation to have because people are going to be these conversations cut to the core of a person, their core beliefs. And so it can be extremely challenging. I've had really passionate discussions such as these with friends. And it's like, hey, we're like family, and it's still tough, right? And amongst family as well can be very tough. We have to be able to manage our emotions. So, there's definitely strategies that we can talk about just on day-to-day management of our emotions and anxiety and health, mental health, physical health, so that we can be prepared mentally to put a journey that is going to be required. So there's a lot of work that goes into even approaching these discussions. I hope that
Thank you.
answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to answer that. And again, that information is so helpful, I think, for everyone who's on this call, on this WebEx today. So you mentioned the work, right? So one of the other questions we've had is, do you have any suggestions on resources or tips that can help people do the work beforehand to better understand their authentic self?
And so I think that's a great question. I recently I was really looking for something myself that I wanted to be able to give to my clients, because we do a lot of work, but outside of, I see clients for an hour, and I tell them all of the work is really outside of the time that we meet. It's really when the rubber meets the road. So I came up with a workbook specifically for building self-awareness and also giving tips to self-correction. There's a whole lot of self-help tools out there. People really have to be intentional. That's the name of my workbook, intentionality. But people have to be intentional about self-work and the self journey. There's so many different apps and different tools that can be used. My wife is a life coach. She has tools for women. She's really passionate about women, but you have to search out the tools that you want. There's several tools that I have on my website, books and workbooks. But what I would suggest is to make a decision. It really boils down to deciding. If you are, equation that I have for motivation is discomfort plus vision. You got to be really uncomfortable with your current circumstances. If you look around and you don't like what you see, if you don't like what you hear, you don't like the images, and it's so uncomfortable that you want to do something, then you got to be able to vision and see different circumstances. You got to see yourself out of the current condition. And hopefully that will motivate you to do something different. So if you want to work on yourself, daily you got to work on yourself. We are comprised of our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual and emotional health, and all of it is a web. All of it is interconnected. But we have to be intentional about working on each one of those aspects of ourselves on a daily basis. Otherwise, our body and our mind will just atrophy. That's unfortunately how we're designed. But I believe we'll have a way to put some tools. I can send you to the website and things like that in the chat, unless we want to go into each one of those things now.
All I can say is that you're speaking my language on integrated health and wellness. Like it's all those things, right? Mind, body, spirit, soul, environment, family. So thank you so much for bringing in the integrative piece of this conversation. Just a reminder for participants that if you have questions, please make sure that you address them to all panelists. We have a lot of eyes on the chat. So, but if you're only addressing it to one of us, we may not be seeing it. So please just put those in the chat and address to all panelists if you have any questions. So how can we start to knock down mental walls that separate us?
I think that's a great question. I think it's going to start with us as individuals. Um, when it comes to, and we'll get into a lot of this with the third discussion on implicit bias. But a lot of this is understanding again who we are and how we view things in our lens, and being able to adjust our own perspective and our own lens, because we got to lead by example. All of this is, it was once said that we have to be the change that we want to see. I think it was President Obama who said that, or Martin Luther King. But that is a true statement. We have to be what it is that we want to change. So we got to start with ourselves. If we want to knock down the walls of difficulty for someone else to be understanding, we have to be an example of someone that they can say, okay, well, you're different from the rest. You're not like everyone else. And it starts there. We just got to be who we want other people to be and be open. It can be really challenging for some people who believe that their way of seeing things is the absolute. There is no other way. And once you know that that's the type of person that you're dealing with, you may want to choose your battle wisely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Evans. Some questions from the chat. When you find yourself in a difficult situation and feel you are being prejudged as racist or biased, what is the best way to diffuse that tension?
You know what? I think that is a great question because, especially for individuals who are constantly being referred to as racist, I can imagine. And again, we have to be able to take our shoes off and put on the shoes of the individual that we're talking to. People don't really want to do that. But I can imagine if I'm a white person who is always being, referred to as racist, and everybody is throwing the race card always, that is going to have me looking at myself and wondering and thinking and maybe spark some anxiety and some discomfort. And, these types of things you cannot allow to impact you if it doesn't apply. I never forget a situation in high school where I was calling out a person's name. I thought it was their name, and they were like maybe 5 feet away. And I was, Jessica. This person was not moving. They didn't flinch. It was because the name did not apply. And so I never forgot that because it really resonated for me. It's like if it doesn't apply, why would I even move? Why should it impact me? And so when someone tries to throw the race card, if it doesn't apply to you, if you are not racist, if you are not prejudiced, if you are not any of those things, then it should just roll off for you because it doesn't apply. So again, going back to the self-work, we got to make sure we're our truest selves, our most authentic self, and know us. Because if we don't, certain things that are said can really check our armor and our fabric and have us feeling some type of way. We won't feel upset if someone calls us out of our name unless it really applies. Hopefully that answered that question.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. So can you give us some examples or scenarios when a solution-based conversation may be necessary versus an opinion-based conversation?
Okay, that's a good question. I think that it really boils down to our overall goal when it comes to race relations, just period. What do we want at our core? Do we want to just be amongst our culture, our race, or do we want to share? And I think that question can be asked of all of us, as Blacks. Do we want to be integrated or segregated? What do we want? As whites, do you want for it to just be, you, or do you want everybody to be integrated? What do we want? Because the overall goal of the discussion is what's going to come out whenever we're having small discussions about events. It always boils down to what is our overall goal? Are we in here, are we in this to work together or not? Because every situation needs to be viewed from a case by case perspective to say, okay, what happened with these events? If it were you, what would you do? There was a recent shooting where someone's about to get killed, and the police officer shot the person who had the weapon before they were able to inflict or cause injury to the other person. And that event turned into a major race issue.
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking, man, if I'm an officer and I go into a situation like that, and I have just a split second to move, of course, training and all that stuff goes into play, but um, is my goal going to be to save the person who's about to be hurt or what? And so it's not that simple. We can't just go to, okay, it's a race thing. And so we have to really be open. Um, we have to be able to really know what our overall goal is for moving forward with race relations. What do we want? Some people just want to just worry about themselves and their family and nobody else. So I believe really knowing the audience, knowing who it is that you're talking to and what they want, that's early questions. You know, I want to know early before I waste a lot of sweat and energy with this discussion. What is your goal? What do you want to see? I know what I want to see. I'd like for us to be able to work together. If we're all here together and we can't do anything about it, how are we going to make this work? What are we going to do? Are we going to sit here and complain, or are we going to make it happen? What are we going to do?
Thank you so much, Dr. Evans. So, from one of our attendees, in a recent attempt at having a difficult conversation with another individual, white to white, around diversity, I immediately got back, as a white man, I can't do anything right now. I can't do anything right, so I stopped trying. What do you say to that?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there is, I can understand that. You know, I tell people all the time they need to refer to people in a way that they want to see them become. So, you know, if you're always calling somebody a liar, it's hard for them to overcome that. You know, if you're calling somebody a cheater, it's hard for them to overcome that. You want to refer to them in the way that you want them to be. And so I could imagine, you know, if someone is being referred to something constantly, that they may give up on a quest. But then I would also ask the question, okay, what is your authentic self? Because again, if you are your authentic self, if you are truly someone who wants to try, then it should not matter what everybody else is saying. Are you true to your cause and your goal or not? Because no matter what someone says, if it doesn't apply, don't allow it to apply. So it's two sides to it. Is we have to move as people who are you know, when it comes to people who are constantly in a state of victimization, we have to be mindful of, okay, how do we get ourselves out of this, and how do we refer to people who are the quote unquote oppressor? How do we refer to them? If we continue to call them oppressor, and you're this and you're that and you're racist and this and that, what incentive do they have to do anything different? But then on the other side of that, if you are the person who's the quote unquote oppressor, if you genuinely don't want to be that, if you genuinely want to be someone who loves and receives and works with everyone, and you're not racist, then don't be, no matter what. Be your true authentic self regardless. So, you know, I always say there's always something that both sides can do. Do a lot of couples work. You can never give me a scenario where it's just one-sided. It's always going to be, okay, well, here's what you can do as well. So we got to look at what both sides can do. And when it's on in that particular scenario with two white individuals talking about it, and one person saying, hey, you know, let's do X, Y, and Z, and the other person saying, hey, I gave up. If I'm the person who's trying to be encouraging, I would just lead by example. You know, great example of that is a book called Who Moved My Cheese. It's a life-changing book. Been out for a long time. I even have a video, but there was an individual in there who was trying to encourage his friend to come along. Come on, let's change. Let's do something different. Let's do something new. The other friend was just stuck. He was like, no, I'm just afraid. I don't want to do. And
Mhm.
so the friend had to leave him. You know, so sometimes it will mean separating yourself. Sometimes it will mean ending certain relationships, or drawing firm boundaries to say, this is what's acceptable for me and this is what's not, and leading by example. And then either they're going to catch up or they're not. So that's what I would say to him.
Yeah, that authenticity is key, right? I think that was one of that is one of the first rule, that like be authentic, be your authentic self.
Yeah, I mean, because
Um,
if you're not, then you're going to be folded. People are going to be able to test you and you're going to bend because you're not your authentic self.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. So a couple other questions from our attendees. What role does power play in these difficult conversations, and how do we level the playing field?
What role does power play
Mhm.
in having these discussions, and how do we level the playing field? Oh man, I think that's a very, very layered discussion, because there's so many different scenarios where power is at play. And depending on your definition of power, I truly believe that we allow other people to have power. We have to give somebody permission to have power over you. That's not something that is just freely given. You have to allow it. So if someone is saying something to you that you don't like and you have classified it as disrespectful, you have a choice to respond to that in a way that lives up to your standards or not. So, I believe that when it comes to power, we have to be careful of how we view power and what that means, because I believe I give away my power when I allow someone to push buttons, or when I allow somebody to uh, cause me to act out of character, because really I have control over all of that. And so when I do something that I truly don't want to do, I'm now giving away my power. So in these discussions, power can be at play if you allow it to be. I'm not someone who really subscribes to titles and labels and things of that nature. I don't care if you're a boss or a CEO or whoever, you're going to be treated all the same. You're going to be communicated with the same. And so when people lessen themselves because of a person's position, that's their choice. And so I would not choose to do that, and I wouldn't encourage that. I would encourage being your authentic self at all times, and don't allow someone to cause you to act or say things out of character, because people will. And once they find out they can push your buttons or pull your strings, they'll continue to do it. So it's managing your power at all times.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. That piece about managing power and who you choose to give that to or how you choose to reclaim that. Thank you for bringing that piece into the space.
Absolutely.
Um, we have, I think, two more questions and then we'll reevaluate on time because I know we're coming to the end of the hour. But after you have created a safe space for the consumer to feel comfortable with expressing their feelings, is it okay to follow up with them without triggering their trauma again?
Um, After you have created a safe space, is it okay to follow up with them without
Mhm.
triggering their trauma?
Yeah. So the way that I take this question is related to, you're having these difficult conversations, you're creating this space, but then to follow up could be re-traumatizing or triggering. And I wonder how you would navigate that.
Well, I think that it's important to always continue to check in with the person that you're speaking with. When it comes to
Mhm.
trauma and being trauma informed and working with individuals and families and couples who have suffered tremendous amounts of trauma, it's important to continue to check in. I encourage continuous checking in, and we'll talk about that as well in the next video and discussion on having conversations with children, reflections and summarizing, and really checking in to make sure that, okay, you know what, before going back into this particular subject, how do you feel about it? Is it okay that we revisit this? Um, Ask permission, because people will let you know where they are. And then in real time, if you see that a person is becoming emotional or things are happening with a person, you can still check in. I see that this is becoming a little difficult. Do you need some time? Do we need to take a break? We can revisit this. I have all different types of people I work with. Some people suffer from hallucinations, and it's really challenging to work with someone who's psychotic or suffering from psychosis, and helping them to manage those symptoms without triggering certain things. And so you got to know when to throw up the parachute and bail out. Like, okay, you know what, we got to continue this discussion later or another time. So I think when it comes to dealing with trauma, there's no way around healing unless you absolutely face it. But facing it could be at the end of the road. Doesn't mean that it's early. So it's about really knowing when to face it and how to face it, and doing it in a careful and meaningful manner. So yes, absolutely, you can revisit it, and it absolutely can be re-traumatizing, but you got to be careful how you do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Evans, for talking about how to do that with care and empathy.
Absolutely.
Um, so as some other questions, as a white counselor in training, how can I provide a safe space for my clients of color? Should race be discussed initially? white counselor to that person of color?
Um, I think that to answer that, I think that really it goes back to ultimately being your authentic self. I have had some of the most impactful and memorable and remarkable professors I've had were white. My favorite teacher in high school was white, and I went to all black high school. And so it was because of their authenticity that drew us in. It locked us all in. It was because you could see that genuinely they cared. Genuinely, they didn't care anything about what other people thought of them and their mission to impact everyone and to help everyone and to move people through stages of change and to do it without any reservations, regardless of color. My high school teacher, Robert Hoderney at Archbishop Carroll High School in DC, he adopted two black kids. He was extremely involved in the sports and taking pictures and authenticity, him being his true and honest self is all we needed. And, because we're at the end of the day, we're humans first before anything. People are going to see your humanity first. So if you're a clinician and you're genuinely wanting to make an impact, they may try to test you. They may check in to see, okay, is this person real? And when they see that they can't phase you, when they see that, okay, you're not phased by the quote unquote race card, then they say, okay, well, maybe they real. They want to see who you are. So if you're authentic, you don't have to even bring it up. They're coming to you as a white individual. They know you white. Right? They can see you're white. So you don't have to even say you're white. But as soon as you are genuine and you are really you care for them, because you can't train caring. I did a whole lot of training, worked in the government for 14 years in law enforcement and returning citizen community and doing training on cognitive behavioral intervention and motivational interviewing and how to engage with individuals coming in and out of the prison system. And the one thing we could not train people to do is care. And so we would revisit certain people, and certain people would have the same issues, is because you can't teach somebody or get or convince somebody to care. So if you are that person who's authentic, you're caring, they're going to see who you are. Be authentic.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. And probably this is going to be the last question we don't have too much time left. But have you experienced moments in the past year of hopefulness in this area? And if so, can you please share maybe one of them for the interest of time? But let's talk a little bit about hope.
Hope. Oh man. It's interesting you would ask that particular question about hope. Again, that's a very layered discussion because I see hope every day. I open my eyes and wake up and look at my family, look at my kids, my wife, and go to work, and I see hope every day in my clients. So, me as an individual, I see hope all the time. Here's what I would say in reference to this. One of the things I was talking about last week, it kept coming up several times, is how to adjust our lens from viewing things in a negative way constantly and missing the positivity in the view. If we've conditioned ourselves to see things as hopeless and to see things as negative or to see things as racist or to see things in so many different negative ways, we can become conditioned in that way and everything becomes that. Everything we encounter becomes that. I can show you a picture of a beautiful horizon with a sun and the mountaintops, crispy snow on top and beautiful weather, and it's a trash can in the corner. When you see the picture, the first thing you're going to see is the trash can, right? And you're going to miss the birds flying. You're going to miss the beautiful sun and the horizon and all the colors because you've conditioned yourself. So what I would recommend is reconditioning the lens and to
Mhm.
start intentionally viewing the positive side. If you catch yourself seeing things as hopeless or witnessing things, and also we were talking about this earlier today, because of so much overwhelming images that we see constantly daily, it may be good to unplug and fast. Sometimes we need to reset our palette, right? I did a fast. This was, you know, with food and nutrition, and cut certain things out of my diet one time. And when I went back to eating things that had seasoning, it was completely overwhelming because I had literally adjusted my palate and I didn't need so much seasoning anymore. And so if you're constantly seeing things that are hopeless, constantly plugged into the news and hearing about these shootings and all of these different violence and all of the stuff that the media chooses to show us every day, then you can become overwhelmed and feel like you're in a state of hopelessness. On top of COVID and quarantine and all these other things that we're facing, and we running away from viruses and multiple streams of viruses, right? We literally running for our lives. We need to be able to say, you know what, even through all of this, I can see the hope, I can see the positive. So, one, I would invite you to do a fast from some of the negative things that you may be plugged into. Maybe do a fast from social media, a fast from the news, a fast from things that show you just a bunch of negativity so that you can reset the palate. Two, I would do an intentional shifting of how you are viewing things. You can become a person who is known as a complainer. If you're in a relationship, you know if you're this person, if you're in a relationship and the person you're with always says, well, why are you always complaining? Do you ever see anything positive? I need you to check yourself if that's you. And to be able to say, you know what? If you catch yourself being negative, stop the thought and replace it with something positive. Stop the thought, replace it with something positive, but you got to recognize it. So I want you to be intentional of being on the lookout of how you're viewing things. Because for me, I've conditioned myself to see hope. I've conditioned myself to see positivity. So I see it all the time. I'm going to see the glass as half full. You know, this bottle right here, it's a little space in it at the top. Somebody might say, man, it's like 5% of the water gone. Right? And for me, I see a lot of water that I'm gonna be drinking
Mhm.
because I've conditioned myself that way. So begin to recondition how you see things. So for me to answer the question, yes, I've seen a lot of hope in individuals and the community and in the country, really. You know, I've seen hope in the country. I've seen the efforts that people are making. I've seen the efforts that even if it's small, even if it's small efforts, I've seen it. So um, begin to recondition yourself and your lens.
Thank you so much, Dr. Evans. We have come to the end of our time, but before, and I want to thank all of our attendees and your amazing, insightful questions, and Howard County Health Department for putting on this event. Before we leave, I know we're a little bit over time, but let's talk a little bit about where you can get access to this content. These recordings will be available probably early next week at the LHIC website and the Health Department website. And this is only part one of this conversation. So our next one with Dr. Evans is on May the 21st from 12 to 1, difficult conversations about race with kids. And June the 18th from 12 to 1, also cultural competency and implicit bias about race. Thank you all for spending some time with us today. And Dr. Evans, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your lived experience. Take good care.
Thank you for having me. Are we offline?
It looks like attendees are dropping off now, Dr. Evans. We still have about 17 attendees still on here. So